Good afternoon, and welcome to today's class on the rhetorical stage of formation with Laura Berquist. Laura, will you please begin with a prayer?
Yes, thank you, Sue. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Mother of divine grace,
Pray for us.
in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen.
Amen.
Okay, so today we are going to talk about the rhetorical stage, children in the grades 10 through 12. I am going to, in this presentation, assume a certain familiarity with classical education. If this is the first module you are listening to, or I would encourage you to listen to our classical education module as well. There's some information there about how men think and about definition of classical education taken from its end and also from its form that I think would be useful. And I'm going to kind of presume that in this presentation. So in this rhetorical stage, we are working with children who have in some way been prepared for the arguments they are now addressing. The foundation has been laid in terms of methodology and in terms of content. This is true even if they haven't been in the Mother of Divine Grace program, at least in some measure, because in terms of methodology, one is always working with the natural inclinations of the student. Whether the students were in Mother of Divine Grace or not, they memorized, observed, and sequenced in their early years. They argued in their junior high years, and now they're ready to move on to elegant persuasion about high and noble objects. So methodologically, you can enhance their skills by intentionally working on them, but whether you do or not, they're going to work on them. In terms of content, a student who is not using the MODG program in the early years might not have quite the same preparation. But hopefully he studied material earlier that he can now come back to and study on a deeper level. In Mother of Divine Grace, that is intentionally worked into the program. In history, for example, we start, with family history in second grade, and we do American history first, personality-driven, and then event-driven in third, fourth, and fifth grade. It's in sixth grade that we start our chronological approach to history. And so in sixth grade, we study ancient Egypt. In seventh grade, the students study ancient Rome and Greece, and then in eighth grade, they move on to medieval history. In ninth grade, they're studying U.S. history, so they're coming back to the U.S. history. Now, in the 10th through 12th grades, the students return to the same ground, but in a much deeper way. In 10th grade history, they once again study ancient history. 11th grade, they study medieval history. And then in 12th grade, the students are back studying U.S. government. Now, all learning is cyclical. One learns something and comes back to it later at a deeper level. In addition to the deeper consideration of the subject matter, for example, ancient history in 10th grade, which we studied in 7th grade, there's an additional content goal. So we're studying the same subject matter, but at a much deeper level, using more demanding and informative texts, right? But there's also additional content that we are looking at. The writing assignments in 10th grade history provide ample opportunity to consider the definition of the goodness of man, to make judgments about whether someone is good or not, to consider the nature of stable government, and to think about how the virtue of a people affects the common good of the country. Now, all of these topics are appropriate to the rhetorical stage of formation. All along, hopefully, there's been an emphasis on truth, beauty, and goodness. If children are nourished on the true, the good, and the beautiful, they will love those things because they're desirable in themselves. Children raised this way are naturally repelled by the ugly and the false. Now, I'm not saying that well-raised children can't make bad choices. Look at Adam and Eve. But it is easier to be good when you've been raised in accord with right reason at every level. Heroic lives have been presented to the children, which I find to be a very helpful tool in developing virtue. The beauty and goodness they have been exposed to are all ordered to the truth as such. At this age, the 10th through 12th grade years, the children are ready to pursue the ends of rhetoric explicitly. One can certainly see why this stage is called the rhetorical. Rhetoric is of three kinds: the political, the forensic, and the ceremonial. These three kinds differ in their ends. Political rhetoric aims at establishing whether a proposed course of action is expedient or inexpedient, basically whether it'll work or not. Forensic rhetoric addresses whether an action done was just or unjust, and ceremonial rhetoric addresses whether someone deserves praise or blame. In our high school program, the students discuss all three types of actions and characters. These ends are all suited to the man who is concerned with the noble and the good. They will be best achieved by the man who is wise. I find that students of this age like to address apologetics, because there is no more noble or worthy subject, for the object of apologetics is wisdom himself. Now, to attain these ends, the speaker has three means of persuasion. The first is his own character. He has to present himself as someone who is worthy of belief. The second is his power to affect and control the emotions of his listeners, for their state of mind will greatly affect how receptive they are to his argument. And then the third element is the persuasive quality of the argument itself, for the premises must be likely and the procedure logical. In my experience, students in the rhetorical stage are interested in the high and noble. They care about what is good and bad, and about what is blameworthy and praiseworthy. So the ends of rhetoric are by nature of interest to the high school student. In the Mother of Divine Grace program, there are about 4,500 students. Among these students, there are a small percentage of special needs children. One of our goals has been to develop a program that will help these children learn well. To that end, we started a special needs department, and we've developed a program for Mother of Divine Grace special needs consultants. At one of our meetings, we had a speaker, Sharon Hensley, author of Homeschooling Your Special Needs Child, a certified special education teacher. What she said was valuable in its own right. But I also found it illuminating as to education in general. She said that in special needs education, there must always be a balance between compensation techniques and therapy. For example, when a dyslexic child just can't seem to learn to spell, one must both teach him to use a spell checker and continue to teach the principles of spelling, with an emphasis on strengthening his visual imagination. The spell checker is a compensating technique that will help him in life, but the therapy of strengthening the visual imagination is even more essential. So you can imagine these two elements in a pan balance. During the younger years, the balance should be weighted toward therapy. One will teach compensation techniques, but he should concentrate on strengthening the areas of weakness in the student. During the middle school years, the balance should be at parity. That is, there should be an equal emphasis on both compensation and therapy. In the high school years, the balance should be weighted in favor of compensation, but without abandoning therapy. Now, that seems like common sense to me, partly because it's the same general model I have used in thinking about the content and method of the classical curriculum. So imagine another pan balance. The items in the balance are educational content on the one hand and educational method on the other. During the younger years, the balance should be weighted toward method. One will teach intrinsically good content, but he should concentrate on strengthening the tools of learning in the student. During the middle school years, the balance should be at parity. That is, there should be an equal emphasis on both content and method. In high school, the balance should be weighted in favor of content, but without abandoning method. In the case of these two items, this is all even easier to accomplish than in the earlier case of compensation and therapy, because there's no opposition of any kind between content and method. When a teacher teaches a student to use the spell checker, she's not working on strengthening the visual imagination. To include that side of the pan balance, she needs to have another different educational activity. But when a teacher is teaching the Roman Constitution, she will adapt the way she teaches it to include the appropriate method for the student at his current stage of formation. Thus, though the emphasis might change as the student develops, both content and method are important components of every assignment at every level. Content concerns what you are thinking about, while the method has to do with how you think about it. There's a sense in which methodology and content converge in high school. Any of the formative activities of the various stages, memorization, analysis, communication of beauty, can be done with many different subject matters. It's usually a good idea to exercise them with materials that are easier to use or that meet the particular student's interests. And that's not because there's nothing in one material that's better than another, but because students learn better when their differences in interest and learning style are taken into account. However, in explaining a view of education that invokes the difference between formation and information, that is, between methodology and content, the question naturally arises, well, isn't the formation within information itself? One friend told me, it makes me nervous, Laura, when people start talking about formation as though it was something that happened without reference to the material that's doing the forming. Surely some materials are better than others. And surely that's true. Remember, if you listen to the educational the classical curriculum talk or any one of the other modules about the stages of formation, I talk about habits of thought. And habits of thought have to do both with the formed intellect, knowing these things which are necessary before you can move on to those things. So there's a method there in that some things come first and some things come second, but it's based on the necessary content. There's also habits of thought that have to do with ways of approaching things, learning, how to determine what's the first step you take when you're learning a new subject area. What's the second step? What's the third step? What does that method of procedure look like? How does it change when you have different kinds of subject matter? Those are also habits of thought. So when we're talking about the difference between formation and information, we certainly do recognize that information is formative. I mean, even in the words, right? You see the connection. There's formation contained within the word information. Nonetheless, even though that's all true, formation and information are not necessarily identical. In the first developmental stage we addressed, the grammatical, which, we speak of it up to 5th grade, the student has a natural inclination to memorize and observe. A child can do this with any number of materials and still attain basically the same benefit. Some materials are virtually indifferent in terms of formation. Whether you use Aesop's Fables or the Book of Virtues by Bill Bennett will not materially affect the rest of life. Memorizing poems is a useful and formative exercise, but which poems are chosen is not necessarily significant. In cases like these, the method is more formative than the material. Other materials are more formative in themselves, but it's not always essential to use one particular source. For example, I like to have the children read and retell Bible stories in their early school years. The stories are certainly formative, and the method used in the retelling is formative. But there are a number of good texts that might be used, and which one is chosen is not particularly significant. This is true about grammar texts as well. It is very important to do analytic grammar in the analytic stage of formation. But which grammar text is used ought to be based on individual considerations. Is the parent going to teach this subject on a daily basis? Then Voyages in English would be recommended. Does the student like to work independently, and does he usually work well that way? Then easy grammar might be the best choice. Has the parent ever done diagramming before? If not, Mary Daly's diagramming workbook would be highly recommended. The subject matter is important, but the usefulness of a particular presentation depends on circumstances. However, there is a third category of materials that are formative by their very nature, primarily from the words used and the order within the presentation of the doctrine. The works of Aristotle, the Summa of St. Thomas, the formulations of doctrine from the Church, the elements of Euclid, and even the Baltimore Catechism are examples of this type of material. In each of these cases, the matter has to do with principles of understanding and being, and those are necessary to move forward in that discipline. The clearest example I can think of is the physics of Aristotle, learning about matter, form, and privation, the four causes, matter, form, agent, and end, and the definition of motion as the act of the imperfect, qua imperfect, can be life-changing. Changed my life. Other texts which may state the same information generally will not have the same effect, because the understanding of the one writing the original text is so great that it permeates the presentation and is an essential component in the effect achieved in the learner. So much better to read the Summa than to read somebody's retelling of the Summa. Similarly, so much better to read the physics itself than to read somebody's summary of the conclusions. Now, even then, that is, even when you're using such powerful material, and the formation does arise primarily from the information in that case, the method used in teaching is still important. At Thomas Aquinas College, for example, the method employed involves student discussion. The classes are not lectures. Rather, the students grapple with the material and the tutors guide the discussions. This way, the questions are truly those of the student, and therefore he can appreciate the answers when they come. At every level, the truths of the faith fall into this third category of materials that are formative by their very nature. Nonetheless, the method used with this matter should reflect the current stage of general intellectual formation. Students should observe and memorize at the grammatical stage. At this time of life, memorizing is fun in and of itself. In terms of religious instruction, this means that having your student memorize catechism questions is an activity that is appropriate to this particular stage of formation, and that's important in itself. Children don't need to understand the full implications of the answers now. If they memorize them, the answers will be in their minds and hearts later when they need them. This memorization is also important in terms of the formation it gives to the imagination. Almost all the texts where the formation is essentially tied to the particular text or material are found at the college level. The high school materials, however, are more like those I mentioned above than were the students' earlier materials. I find that a large argument developed over time is important. Our whole high school history program is one long argument about the nature of government in general and our government in particular. And this is not at all to say that there are not other considerations being made, such as what the appropriate life of a virtuous man is. In ninth grade, we are setting the context for the argument about government and learning how to make an argument. I talked about that in the analytic stage module. In 10th grade, we read Daniel so that the student may reflect on the way Daniel deals with the government he lives under, among other things. We read the Iliad so that the children can think about the public and private life of man, and Antigone so that the issues raised regarding the relative merits of God's law and man's law, and the difficulties in ascertaining responsibility, can be assessed. We also look at the life of Alexander, so cool, who was taught by Aristotle, and whose governmental policies in some measure set the stage for the coming of our Lord in the fullness of time. Then, in Polybius's The Rise of the Roman Empire, the student examines the Roman constitution in some detail so that he can see in that particular government some universal truths about the nature of government and what makes a government successful. Now, he's also working on how to use a text and how to format an argument. The last element in the 10th grade history is a consideration of goodness and greatness in men as exhibited in Julius Caesar. The difference between the public and the private, between great achievement and great goodness, needs to be considered. In 11th grade, we are doing two things. We are most importantly expanding the student's understanding of the nature of government and the ingredients of a successful government by looking at two instances, English and especially Spanish government. I hope that the children see explicitly, or at least implicitly, that while the formula for a mixed government, enunciated in the 6th book of Polybius's The Rise of the Roman Empire, contains a universal truth, the Roman government is only one expression of that truth. I want them to see another successful government that had a mixed character, but was a monarchy. That form of government is present in medieval Spain, especially in Aragon. So the history of medieval Spain by O'Callaghan, which is the text we use, the framework text we use for the discussion of Spain, has such a discussion. Not only does it have the discussion, but the discussion of kingship in general is just masterful. All of this is ordered to understanding St. Thomas on law, and especially question 105 on government in the senior year. And the St. Thomas we study is ordered to understanding our Constitution. The students read the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists to grasp the issues surrounding the drafting of the Constitution. After these considerations, they read sections of Democracy in America by de Tocqueville. This is a difficult course, but it's an interesting course, and it's important in the formation of our children. Throughout this course, the children are asked to consider matters in the light of the expedient and the inexpedient, the just and the unjust, and the praiseworthy and otherwise. They write both papers and essays on these questions and discuss the matters. They're encouraged to make a judgment and explain it convincingly. There's another matter we're working on in the 11th grade history, namely showing the students the difference between universal principles and particular historical information. The students read Richard III by Paul Murray Kendall because it is interesting in itself. But it is also an opportunity for the student to see that history, though important, has limitations. Learning about Richard III teaches the student that there is no universal truth about particulars. It's very hard to judge a man's motives when he is in front of you. It's even harder when he lived hundreds of years ago. What makes a man good doesn't change. That's universal. But whether this man is good is very hard to judge. However, one must make some judgments, and there are reasonable ways to do that. Mr. Kendall does it very well. In the science courses in high school, there is also an argument made. There is a general theme in the high school years about the nature of man. It is appropriate to investigate the nature of the soul as part of that study. The natural science course begins that. The student first reads two delightful books, King Solomon's Ring by Konrad Lorenz and Fabre's Book of Insects. Both of these books contain entertaining accounts of scientific investigations with animals designed to help the observer come to an understanding of the causes of animal behaviors. You know, what powers the soul has. Then the student does a project involving living animals. In the project, the student observes animal behavior, raises a question about some aspect of that behavior, and changes the environment in a way that may affect the behavior. Then he observes again, drawing at least a tentative conclusion in answer to his original question. The primary aim of this course is to learn about the living creature as living, seeing the animals performing their proper functions. And in terms of, philosophy, it really is a philosophic course preparing the students to do the De Anima of Aristotle, or any psychology course, because one learns about the soul by observing its proper operations. This approach also prepares the student for the study of biology. Students appreciate biology more if they have considered the proper operations of living animals before they start dissecting dead ones. Excuse me. Even if students do not dissect specimens, most biology texts consider living creatures without reference to the end to which they are ordered, namely, the life of a living being. Natural science supplies for that deficiency. Other appropriate facets of argument and of understanding the causes of things are found in the study of geometry and Latin. Geometry is a really important discipline. It not only trains the mind, but also provides a model of what it means to move from cause to effect. Most human learning moves the other direction, from effect to cause. We see that something is so and start to wonder why. Then we work on figuring it out from what we see, determining what must be true of whatever caused it. All our natural knowledge of God is arrived at in this way. Okay, we move from effect to cause in everything we learn about God naturally. God, on the other hand, knows everything in terms of the cause. He sees things in their causes. In geometry, students have an opportunity to know in that area as God knows in all areas. Because in geometry, the student moves from a knowledge of the first principles of the subject to what effects such principles can bring about. So geometry supplies the student with a model of what we mean when we say God knows all things in their causes. And that is hugely helpful. Latin is also important in training the mind at this stage of formation. It is a discipline for the mind, expands the vocabulary, enables students to read church documents in the original language, and really improves test scores. And while that may be a practical consideration, it is nonetheless a real one. However, the most important use of argumentation and the presentation of that is faith-based. The end of classical education is wisdom. The liberal arts, grammar, logic and rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy are ordered to philosophy and natural theology, and all of this is ordered to sacred theology. That is, to knowing God, who is the first cause. When we know God, we have wisdom, for we see as He sees, at least in some measure. All men are made in God's image and likeness, but this is achieved most perfectly when we are actually knowing and loving Him. To think about God, to contemplate God, to serve God in our intellectual as well as practical lives is the goal. As educators, we give children the tools to do that intellectually in two ways. We use a method which strengthens the intellectual tools of the student, and we arrange an educational content that lays the foundation for argument and provides the principles for judgment. We achieve this goal morally by giving good example and forming the students in good habits, that is, habits that are in accordance with right reason. We make sure that they have in their lives the good, the true, and the beautiful. We must be clear ourselves about the ends of rhetoric and how they are to be achieved. We must be examples, and we must most importantly love and serve God in our neighbor, in the children in front of us. All of this is ordered to the children's formation, both moral and intellectual. Okay, so I would like to look at 10th grade in more detail. As I have mentioned in those previous modules, there are 4 kinds of goals involved at every level of MODG assignments. There's the method, the content, the present method, present content, and then the later formation to which this method is ordered, and the later knowledge to which this content is ordered. At this level, the method, the methodological goal that we are encouraging, exercising, attaining, is to present a position eloquently as well as cogently, to polish arguments, and to put together coherent thoughts on a subject quickly and accurately. Children should learn to think on their feet so that they can easily demonstrate what they know and thus be more persuasive regarding the truth. And it also helps with the SAT and ACT writing tests if you take them. There's a strong emphasis in this level on learning how to speak persuasively to an audience, which includes learning the ordinary conventions for papers, such as footnoting and bibliographies, and the ends of rhetoric. As I said earlier, rhetoric is of 3 kinds: political, forensic, and ceremonial. And these 3 kinds differ in their ends. The political remember, aims at establishing whether a proposed course of action is expedient or inexpedient. In terms of our 10th grade course, it would be answering a question like, were the Romans right politically to keep rebuilding their fleet during the Punic Wars? The forensic, which remember is about whether an action done was just or unjust, which, in terms of the 10th grade program, would be a question like, should Achilles have stopped fighting when he refused to continue to engage the Trojans? And then there's the ceremonial, whether someone deserves praise or blame, and we consider whether Caesar was a good man. That's an example. In the high school program, we discuss all 3 types of actions and characters. All the assignments are framed about one or more of these ends, because I found that it really interests the high school student. You can see that these ends are suited to the man who is concerned with the noble and the good, and our students are. And they're best achieved by the man who is wise, which, the students aren't. But they're getting wiser, and they're interested in the causes. They're interested in, what is the most important orientation? Why is this important to do? And it's the man who is wise who can most answer that, and they're interested in the question. Now, we said earlier, to attain these ends, the speaker has 3 means of persuasion. His own character, so he has to present himself someone who is worthy of belief. It's one of the reasons why, with the high school students, we really work on paper formatting and, the MLA conventions, just because it's part of presenting yourself as someone who's worthy of belief. The second is the students, in this case, the students' power to affect and control the emotions of his listeners, because their state of mind greatly affects how receptive they are to the argument. So that's something we work on by, asking the students to think about who the audience is. In the 10th grade religion, the first part of the second semester is addressing the motives of credibility. I'm going to go on and talk about that. But that's addressed to, an audience where you're starting from what you can know by reason. The second half of that semester is addressed to a believer. Those are 2 different audiences, and the students need to keep in mind who it is they're talking to in order to know what kinds of things they should address, because they will affect and control the emotions of the listeners only as well as they are aware and kind of connected, in a manner of speaking, with their audience. The third thing they need to be able to think about is the persuasive quality of the argument itself, because the premises have to be likely and the procedure logical. Yeah, so we work on that all the way through high school, right? Recognizing an argument, then forming an argument, then presenting an argument. In my experience, the student in the rhetorical stage is truly interested in the high and noble. He really cares about what is good and bad, what is blameworthy and praiseworthy. So the ends of rhetoric are by nature of interest to the high school student, and something that high school teachers should be very familiar with. Now, there are also content goals, which are found in our MODG scope and sequence charts, and our text used and reasons why. In high school, the content goals assume more importance than previously for the reasons I mentioned recently. In the early years, it's the tools of learning that are most important. In junior high, the tools and the content have a parity of importance, but in high school, the content assumes a much greater role. The student is getting ready for college. There are certain pieces of information he needs to know. This fits well with our emphasis, stated above, that the students need to be thinking about making judgments in particular matters. Since, in our curriculum, 10th grade is in that last stage of development, the rhetorical, but just the beginning of it, the formation is still oriented to many of the same goals as 9th grade. The student should be developing the ability to order thoughts, both chronologically and by order of importance, to recognize, produce, or construct an ordered argument, and to present a cohesive and persuasive argument. There we go. He should do these things in the service of wisdom, and his argument should always be concerned with beauty, goodness, and truth. Additionally, we now look to what comes beyond this course of studies. We have been preparing the students to think clearly and logically, and we have given them the tools of learning. All of this is ordered to college courses, to philosophy and theology in particular. The later knowledge to which the content is ordered varies according to the subject. In 10th grade religion, the student is developing the first view of the motives of credibility. He'll examine this again in greater depth in 12th grade. He studies the Roman Constitution and thus mixed government in 10th grade, the Spanish form of mixed government in 11th grade, and also the English form, so that he can intelligently discuss the U.S. mixed government in 12th grade. So, yeah. We're going to look at specific texts, but I have a few comments first. Students in 10th grade are in this rhetorical stage of development that I've been talking about. So a focus for, that we should keep in mind is that persuasive speech and cogent, polished arguments. The student has an excellent opportunity to work on these skills in the religion course this year. Last year, the religion papers all had detailed outlines provided for the student, whereas this year, the first semester papers have very sketchy outlines, or none, but then the second semester papers are entirely the student's own production. So he's been led to a point where he's capable of producing a cogent paper on a difficult matter entirely on his own. He will work on getting the content right and making the argument persuasive to an audience. The particular argument in the second semester religion is the motives of credibility. Yeah. The argument that starts out proving the existence of God, showing that he gave us a religion, that we know about the founder of that religion from a reliable document, the Bible. It's okay, Sue. I think we want to move ahead, though, to the next slide. I don't know if you can do that, but yeah, I think we want to be here. So we're talking about that religion paper, and it's actually religion papers, right? We're doing a number of papers, 5 in that second semester first part. There are 5 papers having to do with the motives of credibility, which again, we start by proving the existence of God, show that he gave us a religion, that we know about the founder of that religion from a reliable document. So we talk about, how you show that a document is reliable. And this document is the scriptures, particularly the New Testament. That what we learn from that reliable document is about this man who claimed to be God. He does, he says, the Father and I are one. He says, before Abraham was, I am. He is claiming divinity. He says he sits at the right hand of the Father. And then, you only have 3 possibilities. Either he's lying, or he's crazy, or he's telling the truth. And we have the students consider those. They reject the lying. He's not a liar, and besides, you lie to gain something. He gained death. He's not crazy. He's incredibly wise. And his responses to things are masterful. So then you're left with, yep, he's God. So then you say, okay, so he has a religion. This God who came to earth has a religion. Then you say, did he start a church? Yeah, a visible hierarchical structure ordered to carrying on his mission. You see that he did do that. Then you look for the characteristics of that church. And the only church that even claims to have those characteristics, namely infallibility and that kind of authority, is the Catholic Church. So the children work on that in their religion course. In writing, in this year, so writing in various subject areas, right? The main focus is to make sure both sides of an argument are presented objectively. That's part of being persuasive. The paper needs to consider both the pro and the con to make it clear that the writer understands the subject matter thoroughly. Then there's a reason to listen to his judgment. All key facts within the scope of the assignment must be present. We have a writing rubrics chart one where it goes, over, like you can see 3 years at a glance, and one that's a checklist. Both of them can be very helpful for this kind of thing, checking your students' writing against objective standards, and they're available in the resource section of your syllabi. Whatever the subject of the writing assignments are, you want your students to work diligently at rewriting and perfecting all the writing skills that we focused on in the previous years. And I always say to my students at the beginning, think about this. I'm going to be looking at your work and saying, does what he says actually follow from his opening statement? Is he answering the question that has been presented? Does each paragraph have one central idea? Are there good transitions between paragraphs? Showing me the causal relationship between the paragraphs. Are alternative possibilities put clearly? Is the reason for choosing one position over the other persuasive? Those are the writing skills that a 10th grade student should master. Geometry is studied this year, and this is a very important discipline. Because, as I was saying, it not only trains the mind, but it's a model of what it means to move from cause to effect, since human learning moves in the other direction from effect to cause. That's what we're most familiar with. And, that's how we figure out almost everything. Almost all the disciplines work that way. Certainly theology does. But God doesn't work that way, right? He sees things in their causes. He sees them in himself because he is the primary cause. So once again, geometry is important. A systematic geometry, one that has, 2-column proofs, that really encourages the student to see the principles and then see the effects that come out of those principles. Very important, both, as I said, because it trains the mind and because it provides a model of what it means to move from cause to effect. And this is just a practical consideration, but for those of you who have 10th graders, geometry will probably be the primary math that you're doing in the 10th grade year, but have your students practice their algebra skills. If they're away from algebra for an entire year, it's hard to just pick up where you left off. So I always have my students just take tests from the previous year's algebra book, and over the course of 10th grade, just work through those tests, reminding themselves of the skills and concepts they have already acquired. Natural science is another deep course, different than either the religion or the history. It requires reflection and calmness of spirit that's really hard for a younger student. So in a way, the natural science looks very simple when you look at the syllabus, but it really does require critical thinking. So the student reads these 2 great books, King Solomon's Ring and Fabre's Book of Insects. Then he does a project involving living animals. And in that project, the student observes animal behavior, raises a question about some aspect of that behavior, and changes the environment in a way that may affect that behavior. He then observes it again, drawing at least a tentative conclusion in an answer to his original question. It requires good critical thinking skills, and it's really interesting. And then, of course, it's helping the students learn about the living creature as living, seeing the animal performing its proper operations. And in that way, it's a very philosophic course, preparing the student to do the De Anima of Aristotle or any psychology course. You're learning about the soul by observing its proper operations. The approach also prepares students for the study of biology. Students appreciate biology a lot more if they've considered the proper operations of living animals before they start dissecting dead ones. So, natural science is an excellent course for the 10th grade student. And the writing skills that I was talking about are practiced in both religion and history this year. The history course is the study of ancient history, as I was saying. We started that chronological study of history in 6th grade with ancient Egypt, and then 7th grade, ancient Rome and Greece, 8th grade, medieval history, 9th grade, we moved on to U.S. history, in a way back, because we did it in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. Okay, now we're going back over the ancient history, in a much deeper way. And then 11th is medieval history and 12th is U.S. history. And again, I mean, I said this, I know, but I would like to repeat it. Learning is cyclical. You learn something and come back to it later at a deeper level. And that's what we're doing. We're considering in a way, the same material, but in a way, very different material because it's at a much deeper level. We consider the definition of the goodness of man. We make judgments about whether someone is good or not. We consider the nature of stable government. We think about how the virtue of a people affects the common good of the country. This is all very important for the high school student. And then we also work on presentation, footnotes, and bibliography. And we have some timed essays this year. We'll have more later, but some. So let's look at the text, Sue. Okay, we talked about the religion text, the Mass and the Sacraments and Catholic apologetics. I will say this. Sometimes people have complained to me that Father Lowe is too dry and that they could, that there are other texts that are a little more engaging. And I understand that. I mean, personally, I find Father Lowe very engaging, but I can see where that's coming from. But the thing about Father Lowe is he's not just giving interesting information, he's giving arguments. He leads the reader from one premise to another and to the conclusions that come from putting those premises together. It's really carefully thought out. Additionally, his questions at the end of the chapters are wonderful. Both the paper topic questions and then just the questions leading you through. If you can answer those questions, you have absorbed that material. So I really like these texts. We do have people who sometimes use something else, but I really like the text. And the Catholic apologetics text does give a really good presentation of what I've been calling the argument for the motives of credibility, which I went through with you. We talked about the geometry. I use Harold Jacobs. It has those qualities I was talking about. At this point, we're almost always doing either our Latin 2 or our Latin 3, which utilize the second half of Father Henley's Latin 1, and then Latin 3 is Father Henley's Latin 2. We do also offer alternatives to that. Some people who are ready move on to our advanced Latin or our college Latin. In the advanced Latin, we have a 3-year plan. So if somebody's going to do advanced Latin for 3 years, 10th grade is the place to start it. We just have this cycle. We do classical, then patristic, then medieval, then we start over again with classical, like that. So that if a student is ready in 10th grade, he will have 3 years available to him. Some of our students do the college Latin using Shelmerdine's Introduction to Latin, which is a college Latin text. It's very good, and it starts again at the beginning. So a student who has limited background in Latin, but is willing to work and wants to do Latin, that's a good alternative. Yeah, we talked about the natural science. Okay, so Sue, let's see. Yeah, we do have a natural science and biology syllabus. So some people don't want to spend the year on natural science. They want to do biology in 10th grade, but they don't want to abandon the natural science. So we did come up with a composite course, but I don't recommend it very often. I don't think it does justice to either the natural science or the biology, to be frank. So with my own families, the ones I work with, I suggest that they do the natural science in the summer, and we do offer a summer course for that, and just do the full biology during the school year. And though it's not ideal, I mean, say you're listening to this and you have a 10th grader, and you do want to do biology in 10th grade, and then you could do the natural science next summer. That's a possibility. I like to do it before biology, but it can be done after. I do think it's a really good course to take. Okay, and we talked about the history in some detail, so I think we're okay there. The literature that we read is all really interesting. I just think it's really interesting. And the framework text is the founding of Christendom. Okay, I think that's probably good for the 10th grade. 11th grade, as in 10th and 12th grades, we're still working on presenting a position eloquently and cogently, having polished arguments, putting together coherent thoughts on a subject quickly and accurately. So the 11th grade science, for example, the student is writing tests at the end of modules, which contain the kind of writing that one does on a test. He also summarizes and explains the argument concerning irreducible complexity from Darwin's black box. And he will consider and discuss humani generis. All of these forms of writing and discussion are good preparation for what is coming up, namely college. In 11th grade, as in 10th grade, there's a strong emphasis on learning how to speak persuasively to an audience. And, we're more concerned about it the older they get, right? So we spend more time on it in 11th grade than we did in 10th grade even. So this includes learning the ordinary conventions for papers, such as footnoting and bibliographies. Which style format you use doesn't matter so much, but that you are using a style format, that's very important. So in every paper in 11th grade, we look for the specific conventions for these things, and we have some listed in the syllabi, in the resource section. You could use those, or you could use something else, some other formatting style manual, like Chicago style, MLA. The point is not so much what you use as that you use something. I tell the kids when they go to college, they need to ask their teachers what style manual that teacher wants them to use, because they're not always the same. And you need to learn how to pay attention to that. The 11th grader continues to consider those ends of rhetorics we've talked about. So in his history course, he'll consider whether proposed courses of action are expedient or inexpedient. So for example, the Inquisition, he'll be considering that. And whether an action done was just or unjust, like the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. And the ceremonial, whether someone deserves praise or blame, he will consider when he is learning about Richard III. In the 11th grade science, which is usually biology using Dr. Weil's course, we consider several issues, evolution, nature acts for an end, that fit into this category, as well as doing the standard biological course of studies. There are also content goals for the 11th grader that prepare him for college. The experimental sciences are important in that light. The later knowledge to which the content is ordered, in this case, has to do with the nature of the soul and the different levels, as it were, of natural being. In 11th grade science, the student is studying living things. One can't really consider living things without considering their nature. Do they have an end according to nature? Where did they come from? All along, we have been preparing the students to think clearly and logically, and we have given them the tools of learning. And all of this is ordered to college courses, in particular to philosophy and theology. Though I do need to tell you that students graduating from our program, who have really given themselves to the program, do well in any course of study. One of my former students went to Texas A&M, and he was going on in engineering, so not philosophy or theology. But, his mom was telling me about some class he took where the teacher was really poor, in the student's estimation at any rate, and more than half of the students who started that course either left or failed. But this kid, who was my student, did really well. And his mom was telling me about it because she said that she asked him, why were you able to do this? It was a really high-level math course. And, she had been concerned about it. And then when she heard that the teacher wasn't that good, she was really concerned. She said, but he was fine. And she said, how did you do that? And he said, well, Mom, I know how to learn. There was a textbook. So, you see, teaching people how to learn, giving them those tools of learning, really is a preparation for college. Now, in terms of the philosophy and theology, it's a fact that the young students don't have the experience necessary to do philosophy well at this level. So that's one reason why it's important for them to read great works of literature and history, and why we have such an emphasis on reading in our program. Through these works, the student gains vicarious experience. And these great works of literature appeal to the imagination and move the affections rightly. They present, or at least imply, profoundly important views of human life and reality as a whole. And the great works of history provide vicarious moral experience, a conception of human society and the common good, and an awareness of the great issues mankind faces. And all of this prepares students well to read more difficult things later, at the right time. The later knowledge to which the content is ordered varies according to the subject, of course. So in 10th grade history, the students are studying the Roman Constitution and mixed government. In 11th grade, now this year, he's studying English and Spanish forms of mixed government and perhaps French as well, so that he can intelligently discuss the U.S. mixed government in 12th grade. So our curriculum this year focuses on this last stage of intellectual development, last in our program. The student should be continuing to develop his ability to order his thoughts, to produce an ordered argument, and to present a persuasive argument. He should be encouraged to do these things in the service of wisdom, and his argument should always be concerned with beauty, goodness, and truth. Now, we're going to look at the specific text, but first I have a few things here I want to say. The religion course in 11th grade is an excellent presentation of Bible studies. We use Father Lowe's Introduction to the Bible. There are paper assignments that help the student master the material and give him practice in persuasive speech. The information is college-level information, but the student has been prepared for this course by his previous religion courses. He's been led to the point where he's capable of producing a cogent matter on a difficult matter. A cogent paper on a difficult matter. That would be better. The particular argument that was worked on last year, the motives of credibility that I talked about at some length, has as a key element the reliability of the New Testament. This year we examine the arguments for the reliability of the Old Testament. It actually strengthens that motives of credibility argument. In writing this year, 11th grade, the main focus is to continue to make sure both sides of the argument are presented objectively and that they're both present in any paper so that you know what the alternatives are, so the reader can see the pros and cons of each position. All key facts within the scope of the assignment should be given clearly. There are very important literature selections in the history course in 11th grade. Make time to discuss them with your 11th grade students. I say that because, 11th grade students are often able to just go off and read and write and sort of not bother you. But we want our children to be formed internally. As I have often said, obedience is no good unless you have their heart too. And the best way to gain the heart of your child is to talk to him. Enjoy being with him. Make an effort to spend time with him that is mutually pleasant. I encourage you to take advantage of the opportunity for that that's presented in the curriculum. For example, in science, in addition to the text Exploring Creation with Biology, the students read Darwin's Black Box, which brings up and supplies great detail for the argument that a design requires a designer. It's an excellent preparation for the fifth way, the fifth proof for the existence of God of St. Thomas. It's not the same argument, but it prepares for that argument. They also discuss in this course the encyclical Humanae Generis, which explains what doctrine about evolution is compatible with the teaching of the Catholic Church and what isn't. The biology course is a good sequel to the natural history course from last year, if you did it in that order. Students appreciate biology now that they have questions regarding the powers of the living soul from the study last year. They want to know the how and the why for the actions they have observed in the living being, and biology can supply the material side of those answers. The student sees that history, though important for all of the reasons I've given earlier, has limitations, and that's something that's important for them to see. Learning about Richard III teaches the student there is no universal truth about particulars. As I have said in the past, it's very hard to judge a man's motive when he is in front of you. It's even harder when he lived hundreds of years ago. What makes a man good doesn't change, but whether this man is good is very hard to judge. However, you have to make some judgments about particular matters like that, and there are reasonable ways to do that. Paul Murray Kendall, in that Richard III book, provides a good example of this. Similarly, the study of the English Reformation and the Spanish Inquisition helps the student see that one can't always believe what one reads. In history, particularly, objective investigation is necessary. I want them to know that. In 11th grade, we study English history and medieval Spanish history while considering these questions of the reliability of historical documents, which is coordinated with the religion study in 11th grade, and then with other forms of mixed government. So, we are expanding the students' understanding of the nature of government and the ingredients of successful government by looking at English parliamentary government and then especially Spanish government, where there was a very successful mixed government. It was a constitutional monarchy that lasted 500 years. And I'm hoping that the children will see that the formula for mixed government, which is enunciated in the 6th book of Polybius' The Rise of the Roman Empire, which they read in 10th grade, that formula contains a universal truth. It tells you something that is always true at all times and places. But there are different ways to express that truth, and the Roman government is one, but the English parliamentary system is another, and the government of Aragon, which, as I said, is a constitutional monarchy, is another expression of that truth. Okay, so let's look at the text. I've already mentioned the introduction to the Bible. The kids, you want your children to be through Algebra 2 by the end of 11th grade so that when they take the SAT or the ACT or the CLT, they will have that mathematical knowledge. If they aren't that far, I would really try to get them to that point. If you're using the teaching textbook series, you'd like to be through pre-calculus. We've done an internal math study, and we just see that if kids aren't through Algebra 2 in Saxon or through pre-calculus and teaching textbooks, they just don't do well on those tests. Okay, let's see. And we talked about the medieval literature. Notice the nice text that we use, So we're studying medieval history, and we are making these judgments about the kind of mixed government, and as I was saying, about what you can know historically. But we also read a lot of nice literature texts. So they read the Ballad of the White Horse, Murder in the Cathedral, Beowulf, as well as Richard III, which I already talked about, and The Life of Thomas More, Isabel of Spain, Columbus and Cortez. It's really fun. They should continue with their Latin, wherever they were. They should move forward. If they're doing the advanced Latin, then they would be in that, in that cycle, wherever it would be. We talked about biology. I do want to say something about the history of medieval Spain. Now, I've said before that in our curriculum, and every year, we try to have 3 kinds of materials. Some that are easy for fluency, some that are right at the student's comfort level, so that it sort of doesn't get in the way. They can concentrate on the content. But we want some that are challenging. So in 7th grade, the Histories by Herodotus is challenging. In 4th grade, it's the Father Schuster text. In 10th grade, probably the Polybius would be the challenging piece. In 11th grade, it's a history of medieval Spain that is challenging. In every year, I try to have at least one such book. So you'll notice that, looking at the curriculum, that the bulk of materials for each year falls in that middle group, the comfort level, but I try to have all 3 levels in every year. So that's one reason we use the history of medieval Spain. But there's another reason for using it. It really is important in preparing students for college-level work to expose them to various kinds of texts. That's one of the things we need to do. My curriculum leans heavily toward what Charlotte Mason calls living books, but learning how to read and use textbooks is an important skill, especially for those preparing for college. At Thomas Aquinas College, where I went to college, there aren't many textbooks, but there are many difficult texts. And at any other college, there will be numerous textbooks. We need to make sure that our Mother of Divine Grace students are prepared to do the kind of work that they will encounter in college. So that's another reason for using the history of medieval Spain, because it is a difficult textbook. Now, one might say, well, there are other difficult books that could be used so as to meet the first and second points I've made. And, while it's true that a history of medieval Spain meets both of these criteria, that is, it's a challenge piece, and that's a good thing to have, and it's a textbook, and it's good to have exposure to textbooks. One could say, well, I'm sure we could find something else that would also fit this criteria, which is no doubt true. But there's another specific reason that we use this text. Our whole high school history program, as I have been telling you now several times, is one long argument about the nature of government in general and our government in particular. Now, there are lots of other considerations, and I hope I've made that clear too. But, we've been approaching this question of, where does authority come from? When does somebody have authority? What is a government? When do you have to obey the government? We're trying to understand what the nature of government is. And in 11th grade, we're expanding the students' understanding of that question by looking at English and especially Spanish government. So, I want the children to be reflecting on this. Now, that form of government, that mixed government that Polybius, I think, really shows determinately, decisively, is a mixed government. The best form of government is a mixed government. That form of government is present in medieval Spain, especially in Aragon, in the form of a constitutional monarchy. And A History of Medieval Spain, this book, is the only place I know that has that discussion. And not only does it have the discussion about the mixed government, but the discussion of kingship in general is masterful. And all of this is really preparing the students to understand St. Thomas on law, and especially question 105, where he addresses the best form of government, which they will do in 12th grade. And that is ordered to understanding our Constitution. So the History of Medieval Spain text provides an important step in an important argument. The other texts used in this year in history are similar in nature. I do think this is the most difficult. As a matter of fact, though, some of the others are challenging too. So, I acknowledge that this is a more difficult course. I know that's true. I have, in our consultant trainings and conferences, we have gone over ways to modify this if somebody is really struggling with it. There are modifications we can make so that the students can still have the benefit of going through this course. But I want you to see why it's important. I think it's interesting and is important in the formation of our children. Okay, so let's look at 12th grade here. 12th grade is the last year. And we're still, the methodology is basically the same. That is, we're working on presenting a position eloquently and cogently, polishing arguments, and putting together coherent thoughts quickly and accurately. This is the culminating year. In 12th grade religion, the student is making a final study of the motives of credibility. He's also studying the teaching of the church regarding marriage, which is appropriate to a person going out into the world. He studied the Roman Constitution and mixed government in 10th grade history. In 11th grade, he studied English and Spanish forms of mixed government so that he could intelligently discuss the U.S. mixed government this year. In our curriculum, this is the last in our stages of development, but the student is continuing to work on the same things we've always worked on, or at least in this rhetorical period. He's ordering his thoughts chronologically and by order of importance. He's producing ordered arguments in order to present a cohesive and persuasive argument. He does these things in the service of wisdom, and his arguments are concerned with beauty, goodness, and truth. We've been preparing these students to think clearly and logically, and we have given them the tools of learning, and all of this is ordered to their college courses, in particular to philosophy and theology. So, yeah, we're going to look at the text, but I have these few things to say first. In religion course in 12th grade, we have a final presentation of the motives of credibility as laid out by Ann Carroll in Following Christ in the World. The information is college-level information, but the student has been prepared for this course by his previous religion courses. The argument for the truth of the Catholic faith starts with proving the existence of God, showing that he gave us a religion, that we know about the founder of that religion from a reliable document, and we can show what's necessary to have a reliable document. That document is the Bible, and that the Bible shows that the founder of Christianity is a man who claims to be God, and that it is reasonable, there's a reasonable argument showing that he is God, that he started a church, and that that church is the Catholic Church. There is also an emphasis in this course on the social teachings of the church, including the teaching on marriage. The children are doing advanced math in 12th grade, which prepares the student for college-level mathematics. It continues the course of study the student has been pursuing, and so continues to train the mind. It requires attention to detail and retention of intellectual argument. It builds on the previous year's knowledge. The theme of marriage is considered in the health course this year, as well as in religion, where the student reads Casti Connubii on Christian Marriage by Pope Pius XI. This is an opportunity for you to talk to your student about the right attitude toward marriage and family life. I really urge you to make time for this discussion. Yeah. It's an opportunity, and they'll go off to college, and then you won't have them there on a regular basis. And I know about this from personal experience because my children are all grown up. So for those of you who have this chance, do take advantage of it to talk to, form, and guide your children on this very important subject. In British literature this year, there's also an opportunity for the student to think about the theme of marriage. The first selection the student reads is Ivanhoe, and the question he considers is, did Ivanhoe marry the right woman? The student will have to draw on church teaching to answer that question. There are other works of literature read that encourage thoughts about the right relationships between men and women, and indeed between members of a community. In the British literature, the student writes 4 substantial papers, exercising all the knowledge he's gained about how to present a position. Many of our students are taking, either in addition to or instead of the British literature, our literary analysis learning support course, which has similar goals. We structured it to accommodate the weekly format, but it's ordered to considering the same sorts of questions. In writing this year, we're doing exactly what we've been doing. We're just trying to hone the skills, right? So you want a persuasive paper, presents pros and cons, all key facts need to be present. In order for the paper to be persuasive, you have to demonstrate that you actually know both sides, right? And then the student should have, at this point, an extensive vocabulary so he can make good word choices, and he should definitely have an effective use of punctuation. And then those same questions that I have, pointed out to you before, things like, does what he say follow from his opening statement? Is he actually answering the question that's been asked? And, are the paragraphs built around one central idea? Are alternative possibilities put clearly? All of that. We're still working on that. And again, I like those rubrics charts that we have in the resource section. They can help you identify those skills. Latin continues to be important for the same reasons as in previous years: discipline for the mind, expanding the vocabulary, enabling students to read church documents, and improving test scores. The chemistry course that most of our students do in 12th grade is a good sequel to the previous science courses. Students really appreciate chemistry after the biology courses because they're in a position to distinguish the living from the non-living. They're pretty familiar with why you say something is alive at this point. And so they can ask the right questions to advance in a knowledge of the non-living elements. And you know, chemistry is a great place for that consideration of when do you have a new substance. So I add these things together and I get a mixture. I add these things together and I get a new substance. How do I know that? Why do I say that? What is it that makes something identifiably a new substance? Very important question for them. Yeah, working on those, you know, persuasive speech and cogent, polished argument skills. There's a lot of opportunity for that in history this year. The student studies U.S. government, reading the founding documents of our country after the St. Thomas, including the discussion between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists regarding each part of the Constitution. And then he writes a timed essay on the arguments. By the time the student has finished the study, he knows the issues that occupied the Founding Fathers and their resolutions, and he's had an opportunity to consider and make judgments about those issues. So, and then after that, he reads some economics tests. Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson, for example. He reads Quadragesimo Anno, the church document that has to do with, you know, the right relationship between employers and employees, among other things. But, you know, capital, wealth, what do you do with it? It's significant in terms of study of underpinnings of government, right? Economics and government are very closely associated. You might have a good idea for your government, but if you don't have the economic means to support the government, you won't have a government. There are some difficult materials in the 12th grade history, religion, and literature courses. So I'm going to say this one more time. My view, you know, for what it's worth, right? But my view is that every year should have some easy material for the student, some at his comfort level, and some that is a challenge. And the challenge pieces broaden his horizons and give him a clearer perception of reality. Because bottom line, no one is comfortable in a reality of which he is the measure. So the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers are challenging, but exposure to more complex language will help the student later to read even more difficult material easily. Okay, let's look at these texts. All right, so in religion, I do want to mention Rerum Novarum, which is the foundational, Quadragesimo Anno, which I was just talking about, means 40 years. And it's 40 years after Rerum Novarum was written. Rerum Novarum is an amazing document that makes the argument for the right to private property. It's so well constructed. And then it talks about what wealth is for and how it should be rightly used, and, you know, what is the right relationship between the employee and his employer, and in the reverse. So it's a wonderful document. We read that. We read Aeterni Patris, where Pope Leo XIII talks about the relationship between philosophy and theology, and he really points us to the study of St. Thomas as someone who has an objective metaphysics, understands epistemology, you know, how someone comes to learn, and utilizes that in everything he does. I'd really like my students to read that. We also read Humanae Vitae, and since they read Casti Connubii in their health class, this is a nice development, right? So to kind of see the consistency of the church's position. We have them read Surprised by Truth as well in religion, which is it's nice because it highlights what moves people to the truth. And that's worth knowing. These kids are going to go out into the world. They're going to meet people who are looking for the truth and don't know where to find it. And having those examples can be a help to them in helping others. I talked about the sex in advanced math. We were talking about the British literature. Look at those nice books. They're so fun to read. And there are other things suggested. And Lit 12 uses some of the same texts and some different texts. Okay, Latin, same thing as in previous years. Okay, good. Chemistry, I mentioned. Oh, I do want to mention there for the chemistry. So I talked about, chemistry just generally as a discipline, but the chemical history of a candle is really fun. It's by Michael Faraday. He's the guy who discovered the connection between magnetism and electricity. He was a great man about understanding what science is, what the experimental sciences are. So when people would say to him, "Oh, you're a great scientist," he may have gotten the Nobel Prize, but at least he was considered for it. I'm not positive about that. But he, when people said, "Oh, you're a great scientist," he would say, "No, no, 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 I'm a natural philosopher," because he knew that philosophy has to do with universal and unchanging principles. The experimental sciences don't. So he did what he did in that larger context. And it shows in this, it's a series of 6 lectures that he gave actually to younger students. But the argument he's making is that the kind of combustion that you see in a candle is very similar to what happens in respiration. So interesting. I encourage you to read it. It's fun. I was talking about the advanced American government and economics, and to mention quadragesimo anno. You see that we do have an alternative. Some of our students use the Abeka American government and Christian perspective, and then economics, work, and prosperity. I really prefer the advanced government course. I think it's a better course. And I don't think it's so difficult. I mean, it's difficult, but I don't think it's so difficult that, our students couldn't do it. But I do recognize that sometimes you need an alternative. So the Abeka American government is good. They actually have you read the Constitution, which I thought was important. And, it's a reasonable course. It's much more practically oriented, more about, what are the houses of Congress. Not that you wouldn't get that from the advanced American government, but the advanced American government is more about what's the origin of these, what's the basis for the membership? What are we trying to accomplish? Whereas the Abeka is just like, here's what we've got. Economics, Work, and Prosperity is a good book. It was written by Russell Kirk, who, as you know, probably was a Catholic. And Abeka just likes the book so much that they use it even though it's written by a Catholic. But it's very good. Anyway, so I think that covers our text. And I hope that was helpful and provides you with some kind of an overview as you are approaching this rhetorical stage of formation. Thank you so much. God bless you. And I do pray for you. I want you to know that. I do pray for you virtually every day.
Thank you very much, Laura. That was wonderful.